you are considered to be one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. If you could go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, what would you say?
A lot of times people say, don't worry as much, right? Enjoy yourself more. With some variation of, hey, this could be fun if you just relaxed a little bit. Uh, I wouldn't give that advice so much. I think being scared as hell was really useful.
My name is Daniel Gerlay, and I'm the president of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society, an international organization supporting exceptional young people in accomplishing their entrepreneurial ambitions. My guest today is Professor Bill O'Farrell of Columbia Business School. Bill is a 30-year veteran of the startup world. He most recently co-founded and was CEO of Body Labs Inc., a computer vision and AI company focused on 3D human body modeling. Body Labs was acquired by Amazon in 2017. Formerly, he was co-founder and CEO of such companies as Speechworks, acquired by Nuance, OpenAir.com, acquired by NetSuite, and the Company of Science and Art, which created the After Effects product line acquired by Adobe. Bill is an adjunct professor at the Columbia Business School, where he teaches Launch Your Startup. Bill received his undergraduate degree from Brown University and a JD from Harvard Law School. I am very pleased to welcome back Professor Bill O'Farrell.
That's quite an honor. Thank you. You've had a pretty star-studded set of folks coming in, so I'm quite honored to be invited back. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to have you back. How did you gather the courage to leave law and become an entrepreneur? What is your advice for those considering switching career paths?
I don't know if courage was what impelled me to leave the law. I think it was maybe a little more desperation. I really, really hated what I was doing. I sort of had always thought that I'd like to start my own company. I had my own company in high school. At law school, I started a law journal. And I went out. I was working at a law firm in Silicon Valley, which had a lot of Silicon Valley clients. So I sort of went out there with the notion of, well, let me see what's going on. And so, but a year and a half in, it was just unbearable. And so I was like, I got to quit. So I can't do this anymore. And if I do this a day longer, just my life will begin to be a failure. So I had I left with some notion that it was not at all a tech idea. This was 1990, and I thought that I would start a chain of brew pubs, of microbreweries along the East Coast, because microbreweries were just becoming popular in California, where I was working. And I thought, this is a great idea. It's great economics. Let's go do that. So actually, I quit with the notion that's what I was going to do. I came back east, and then very circuitously, I won't bore your listeners with the details. I sort of came in contact with some folks who were a couple years behind me at school, at university. The brew pub idea I thought was a good one, but they were working on something. It was a little bit more. It was a little easier to get my arms around. It was a couple engineers, computer engineers. They started a company. They needed somebody to run the company, and they thought the next lawyer might be the right guy. Clearly, they didn't know anything either. So I signed on as CEO, and that was a real kind of what we used to call a macaroni and cheese startup. We had no money. We were eating macaroni and cheese and ramen noodles. But eventually, these partners and the tech partners and the team they built around them came up with the After Effects idea and the product. So we got lucky, and that's sort of how the ball started getting rolling for my tech career. I think the first advice is, if you hate what you're doing, stop doing it. Sometimes one doesn't have the option. Paying rent is important, and paying back student loans in America is a big problem. But I think it's also finding the right people as much as it is the right idea. I think doing it by yourself is hard. So if I had advice to give, it would be, if you can, team up with one or two people whom you really like, you really trust, whose judgment you trust, whose ethics you trust, and who you trust to sort of be in it with you, sort of day and night.
You said you already started a business in high school?
Yeah, I was a clam digger. I went out on a flat bottom boat in the Great South Bay of Long Island. I would leave at sort of 5:30 in the morning, and we had what were called tongs. They're these sort of like big giant tongs with baskets with interlocking teeth on them, and I'd sort of dig clams all day. I had a partner on the boat, and then eventually I did it all by myself. So that was my business. I mean, it was, wasn't a big business, wasn't even a scalable business, but it got me through college, so that was good.
You paid your way through college?
Yeah, I also got a lot of financial help, and I took out a lot of loans. But yeah, it was actually extremely well paid for a college kid. I mean, there were grown-ups sort of feeding families on it. So it was at the time it was a good deal.
Do you know where your initiative for entrepreneurship came from? Was it something innate, or did someone inspire you?
But both my parents were public school teachers, and they were sort of first generation immigrants. My grandparents were Irish. So, for them, the jobs that were safe, doctor, lawyer, teacher, were probably the more obvious. I don't know where it came from. I think maybe I have an authority problem, perhaps. I don't know. I will say one other thing. I felt like, and I think really at the law job, that was where it just really all came to a head. I thought to myself, look, I looked at all these, at the time, what I would call kids who were starting these tech startups and other things. And I looked around, I was like, they don't know that much more than I do. They don't look any more qualified than I do. And I'm not happy with what I'm doing. If I'm going to mess something up, if I'm going to mess my life up, then I at least want it to be my fault, and not, the fault of some organization that I just, or blame it on some organization. So it was more, I need to have control over my life, I think, was really maybe the sentiment, if you will. I don't know where it came from.
In our previous interview, you said you liked hanging around hubs of innovation, and that's where many of your startups came from. What are the greatest hubs of innovation in the world today, and where will they be in the future?
First of all, I wouldn't, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on where the hubs are, throughout the world, and that's one important thing right now. Is it's not just the U.S., it's not just Europe, it's not just China. I mean, there's innovation happening all over, and I think that's actually a remarkable thing, and I think that's actually. I think there's a lot of momentum that's developed over the last several decades to drive innovation. The characteristics there for me that I kind of look at for hubs of innovation are places where there's enough resources to really take an embryonic idea and move it close enough to commercialization that find resources to fund that technology or that idea for many years after it comes out of the research institute or the university. If you've got really well-funded research institutions, I mean, the classic ones in America are the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Stanford, Berkeley. I'm sitting in the Columbia facility now in the life sciences. They've got fantastic innovation. Cornell Tech in New York here, and NYU. And my last company was a spinoff out of the Max Planck Institute in Germany. So in those places, there's enough money, frankly, and resources to not just come up with the theory or not just come up with, kind of a small proof of concept, but really to carry it through. So at the commercial level, you can kind of look at it and say, okay, we're going to have to work on this thing, but it's not going to be 10 years before the first person buys it. So I think that when I'm looking at, research, that the tech that's coming out of research institutions, one of the things I look at is, how much has the institute been able to push this forward, and how long is it going to take before we can really get somebody to start buying it and using it?
What is your proposal to people developing technologies you'd like to commercialize?
I would say, most of my career has been commercializing technology that's come out of university. Because the first couple of things worked out for me, as much by luck as anything else. I've been able through contacts, through introductions, been able to be introduced into a lot of different places with a lot of nascent technology. And the proposition that for years, I would present is to a professor. It's usually the postdocs who are the ones, because they're the ones who are going to come out and do the heavy lifting, right? The professors are great consultants, but they don't want to quit their day jobs. They've got tenure and they love what they're doing typically. So I'd find the team at a university and I'd say, look, the tech team, I'd say, look, you guys know the tech. I can't do what you do. You run the tech. I'll run the business. Let's license the technology. We'll raise a little money, see if we can get somebody to use this thing and start buying it. And we'll raise a little more and so on. So the proposition traditionally was, I'll run the business piece. And I might add, actually, for 30 plus years, that sort of made that was a fairly straightforward proposition. And it, worked out sometimes. What actually was interesting to me is recently I found that I might make that same proposition. But what I'm finding is that folks in the tech field are like, well, we'd really like you to be involved, but one of us wants to be CEO. And I'm finding that's, I think being the CEO of a startup has become kind of, I don't know if you want to call it chic, de rigueur, what have you. And it's an interesting phenomenon. I think being associated with the startup doesn't have the same kind, doesn't have the same kind of risk. I think people are far less nervous about taking that kind of risk. I think startups have become much more an accepted part of the fabric of at least the American economy. But what I find, not necessarily the smartest use of resources is if you've got one or two people who know a technology inside and out and can advance that technology. It seems to me, not very smart to have one or both of them or several of them, focus on learning how to be a business person. Like there's lots of people who could do the business, including me, but there aren't that many people who can take this, specialized technology and who understand it and can really make it, can really advance it forward. So I think that's a trend that I'm not terribly fond of right now.
From the opposite side, what is your criteria for evaluating a technology to invest in?
So I'm going to answer it slightly facetiously, and then I'm going to try to give you a deeper answer. So, typically I say I look for two things: is it cool, and can everyone get rich? and it's slightly facetious, but really what I mean is, first, is it cool, right? So for me, and this is just me, I like technology. It's really kind of pushing the edge. That's really a unique invention, a real difference maker. So I've done things like speech recognition. The After Effects was coming into digital video when it was just starting. I was just doing an AI and computer vision company. It's sort of, to me, that's cool. Like you could make a lot of money. I don't know, doing roll-ups of kind of ad marketing companies or things like that. That just doesn't speak to me. And it's not to say it's bad. It's just it's just not, to me, kind of cool technology. Now, that said, there's a lot of cool technology in university. You go to some of these research institutes and you just, you're overwhelmed. Like there's robots walking around and there's it's all kinds of stuff. But a lot of that doesn't necessarily have a commercial, a lot of that isn't commercially viable, or it's not commercially viable in a short enough time that you can, really build a successful company. So when I say, everybody gets rich, I mean, I am being facetious, but like, is this close enough? Is the market going to be big enough? Is the ecosystem that has to be around this new cool technology developed enough that you could actually go out and make a viable business out of this? So those are the things I look for. So that's just sort of the general stuff. And then, I think it's super important that you find the right partners. And in that, I look for, are these world-class scientists? One of my last partners sits on the Royal Swedish Academy of Scientists. He picks Nobel Prize winners. So that's pretty world-class, right? But do I like them? Are they like, can I sit in a room with them for 12, 14 hours and not be ready to kill them? And then do I trust them? And part of that's just, do I trust their values, et cetera, et cetera. But I also mean by that, do I trust their judgment? Because I think that's one of the most important things. It's like, there's a lot of smart people in the world, but judgment's vital. And so when it comes to the tech, I need to know, because I don't have that expertise. Like, look, what can we get done with this tech? Like here's the resources. Here are the resources we have or can gather. Tell me what you can make this thing do over what amount of time, and where's our market opportunity. Where's that going to intersect with the tech viability? So their judgment's really important. So that's kind of the stuff I look for.
Do you have any networking advice?
I tell you what, I don't think has worked very well. Although maybe it's gotten better. So like just reviewing a patent portfolio at a university. I tried doing that a little bit. That doesn't work too well. There's too many. Like it's just all too literally academic, and it depends what you're looking for. For me, I look for deep tech stuff, and so I find that one can go and try to talk to the licensing offices at universities, and the universities have gotten much more sophisticated and much more sort of open to sharing the information and trying to match on business entrepreneurs with the tech folks. But I think that so that's one way to do it. I find though that the professional introductions have typically been a little better. Weirdly, a lot of times it's the lawyers who make good introductions, because what I found historically, and I think this remains true, at least in my little world, if a technologist has a good idea, among the first things they do, if they're smart anyway, is they go and they talk to a lawyer and they say, can I patent this? What do I have to do to protect it? I need to start a company. And oh, by the way, I don't know anything about business. Like, what would you suggest I do? And so, I've gotten my second company, SpeechWorks, which was a spin out of MIT. I was introduced to my co-founder through a lawyer, for example. So there's a lot of that. But I think networking and what you want whatever the technology is, and whoever the inventors of the technology, or the guardians, or the folks who are trying to commercialize the technology, you want that to be somewhat self-selected. You want them to believe, hey, this is maybe something that's worth doing, because particularly like me, if you're not really technically savvy, you can't make that assessment yourself.
Do you think being a Harvard-trained lawyer helped you in connecting with other lawyers?
No, actually, I wouldn't say that had made the difference. I think what made the difference was just getting very lucky on the first company, being able to sell that, and then having through that company met enough different people, and I used a startup lawyer, and then we had a lawyer when we sold the company, and I put the word out like, okay, we sold this, I got to do a little time, but I don't want to stay at Adobe, and so it started that way. So I can't say that it was due to Harvard Law School, no.
What are the skills entrepreneurs need to succeed in the AI era?
I don't want to opine too unequivocally here, because I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen in the AI era. I mean, it's exciting. It's super exciting. It's also super scary, right? But if you're asking me to guess or forecast, I think that the skills that entrepreneurs need right now, historically, are really, the ability to sort of prioritize. Well, first, observe, gather information, analyze, information as it comes in, and be able to very quickly adjust to new information and prioritize the tasks that need to get done in order to hit important milestones, because you never have enough resources, right? And so you can't waste a lot of time, money, energy doing stuff that isn't going to advance you along the path that gets you, commercialized, or gets you more financing, or whatever the next set of milestones are. So I'd say that, the ability to prioritize is going to be always there. But I think in this world, things are moving so fast. That's that sort of skill set, that set of muscles that says, okay, whoa, new data. What does that mean? What does that mean we have to do? I think that cycle of adjustment is going to get really, really, really fast. As it get accelerated, and I think the ability to adapt to that is going to be important.
When building your startups, what was the order in which you hired different types of people?
Well, again, in my world, it's typically been deep tech stuff, right? So the engineering, the technical team was always the first priority. And the reason that was the first priority is we needed to achieve certain technical milestones in order to, have some early pilots with some early customers. And because they were pilots and they were early customers, and there was, long negotiations or, whatever, bespoke deals, if you will, that was usually something I would do, because there's no point in having a business development or sales team, because, every agreement, every relationship at the beginning is slightly different. So we'd always, have to hire out the engineering team first. And in my experience, I've always worked with typically postdocs at a university who are really, really smart. And we'd hire, a number of developers and engineers, not necessarily researchers, to begin building the commercializing the tech, so it became a commercially robust product. And relatively soon, when we talk about sort of the exec hires, I would say, well, look, I think we need a VP of engineering. And invariably, the tech folks, these brilliant postdocs would say, no, we're technical. We don't need an engineer, a VP of engineering. And then I would kind of push, because I'd seen it before. And I was like, well, look, we need somebody to do the hiring. We need somebody to make sure the code reviews are done. We need somebody to, make sure that the, code's being checked in and out. We need to, blah, blah, blah. And they go, okay. And then we'd interview some people. And then I was been really lucky to have found really great VPs of engineering. I'd say within 2 weeks of having hired that particular hire, all of my technical partners, they'd all come back and say, you're absolutely right. And so then we had like a really good combination of great research and great, commercial execution. So that was sort of the first set of things. And then after that, it was typically business development folks and maybe market, sort of not necessarily VPs of marketing, but somebody who could get the word out and do lead generation and things like that for a business development team. And I underscore business development because, again, with my companies, it's usually a while before it's kind of turnkey, and you can just say, okay, well, here's a sales team, just sell this. It's usually, here's capability, let's figure out how to get somebody to buy something we can make out of this technology. So that's typically been how it's unfolded.
There's this idea that thanks to AI, a company that used to require 50 people will now only require 5 people. Do you think that's accurate?
Really going to be the case I mean, look, I think every industry as we know it is going to be changed by, this generative AI stuff. And I think that the scenario you just painted for many companies will be true. I mean, you're just not going to need as many people. I mean, the fact that you can like draw a web page and have that coded up, without having to have a software engineer involved is both extraordinary and terrifying. So I do think that efficiency, time to market, resource needs in almost every place are going to be affected. Again, I think it's a little too early to make any hard and fast predictions, at least for me. And I think things are moving so fast too that it's just sort of it's head snapping, the information that's coming out. But I guess to answer your question directly, no doubt there's going to be lots and lots and lots of companies that can do what they used to do, or maybe not even do what they used to do, won't be able to do what they used to do because AI has replaced it. And it will take far fewer resources to get it done.
What was your approach to hiring great people? Did you hire headhunters, or did you try and get a lot of publicity?
No, I mean, I think the first set of great people, there was a headhunter that I used, for a long time ago. And he said, I find people by what their hang around group is. I was like, what are you talking about? He said, well, like if you really think somebody's, smart or whatever, like you really appreciate this person as a business person and you like their judgment and they're smart and they're successful, who are they hanging around with? Like, who's their friend group? It's like, and so, I think that if you start, and for me, again, I've had great partners. So on the tech side, the first thing that typically happens is you get, my great partners go and they grab they grab some of their, their colleagues whom they really, or, folks they know who they really respect and can rely on. And so that's starts sort of the, the kernel of a really solid team. And once you have that kernel, then there's a lot of filters within the organization as people who maybe are not known or not known entities come through. There's a lot of places where you've got a lot of quality people, applying their own parameters and their own, set of values to these hires coming in. So the first set, I think, is almost invariably through, through personal connections. And then, at some point, if you're growing fast, you just can't do that. So that's where headhunters come in. And again, I think, headhunters can, particularly ones working on contingency, can just turn over a lot of folks really fast. So you got to do some filtering before you even talk to them. But if you've got that good core group of folks whose judgment you trust, typically at somewhere along the line, if there's not a good candidate, they get filtered out.
What do you think of firing people? Do you give second chances?
Oh yeah, I hate fire. I think if you talk to almost any, I think you talk to almost any business person, like firing people is just the worst. It's just everybody hates firing people. It's so miserable. In the hiring process, a lot of it, a big component is what's this person's personality, right? Because some people at a startup anyway, some people just aren't cut out for a startup. They like structure. They're unsettled by things changing quickly. They hate having to do something different than they were hired to do. So if someone's personality is like that, fair enough. It's not good or bad. It's just like they're probably not going to be very successful in a startup. So it would be good, in order not to have to fire somebody like that, to try not to hire them to begin with. And then I might carry that a little bit further and say that if you need someone to change their personality in order to do a good job, if you need them to be, to take rejection better, or whatever it's going to be, you need them to be more gregarious, or whatever. People don't change. People can't change their personality. So I think that to answer your question about giving people second chances, I think that's like just a fundamental of running a fair and good company is you got to let people know when they're not doing well. And when I've had to do this, usually if I've, for whatever job I've hired them for, I say, look, you're not performing well. Here's why. We really need you to do this, and we're hoping that you can bring this kind of energy, or achieve these things, and coach them a lot, meet with them a lot, and so we're going to give you whatever, 6 months, 3 months, depends how much you have. I think that's a process that has to be done. But I would say that there have been times when I'm like, look, you're not the kind of person who's gonna, like, you're not a people person. So I don't say that, I say it more diplomatically. So you don't like, having to, manage a bunch of people. So your personality is not such that you're going to be really good, meshing these people together. And at that point, asking them to try to perform that job better, typically doesn't have a high degree of success. And in those cases, I try to gently, diplomatically suggest that maybe, there's another job you could do here. And, maybe you'd want to try to do that. The reason I say that that's, a lot of companies, that's not possible, but typically one of the things I look for is flexibility in a hire. So giving them second chances, yes. Trying to give them guidance on how to succeed in the second chance, yes. But sometimes I just have to make the assessment, I don't think this person's personality is suited to this job. We made the mistake thinking they could do it, or the job changed because we're a startup and it's no longer a fit. So let's see if we can move them somewhere else that's going to be productive.
You said you believed in stock options. Do you believe in giving real stock or giving phantom equity that only vests if there's a sale?
Typically, a lot of this has to do with tax laws in the U.S. So, I'll answer the question, but I'm not sure how applicable it'll be. typically the earliest employees, if founders, the earliest employees, we give restricted stock, which means you own the stock, but if you quit, whatever has invested, we get to take back. And that's important for a bunch of tax reasons. And also, you get to vote the stock, which not, if you're voting, if decisions are made around stock voting, early in the company, you probably got a different problem. But anyway, you own it for all intents and purposes, and the company can take it back if you leave before whatever the typical 4 years is. So that's for the early employees. And then in my companies, it's always been proper stock options. There's a strike price that's set by, a regulatory provision every year. It typically vests over 4 years, 1 year cliff, and then monthly after that. That's been the classic way of doing it. And I'm not sure that is entirely different than a phantom stock option, because if you don't go public, you don't sell the company, the option's not worth anything anyway. So, but that's the way we've done it. And again, just to be clear, because I know you've got an international audience, a lot of this is driven by U.S. tax code. That's all the financial piece. For me, the key piece is say, hey, look, this isn't like you're working for us or me and my company. It's like, here, you own a piece of this. Like if like, I want you to feel like, it's your company too, because I want you to have that kind of dedication. I want you to bring that level of, sort of dedication and work, but also, that level of, like, look at it, like, is what you're doing, what do you think is what you're doing adding to the value of this company, which is also yours? I think it makes employees much more aware of, or at least, causes them to think critically about whether they're adding value or not to the company.
What is your advice for responsible AI development?
The companies that I'm working with are not the fundamental enabling AI companies. Like, one of them actually is an AI watermarking company. It's a digital watermarking company to help validate the provenance of images and video. I just don't know. I mean, it worries me because, ideally you'd like to have, ideally you'd like some sort of regulation on what's happening. I would say a couple things there. Congress in America anyway just is so far behind the technical curve on what they know and what they can do, so I don't have a lot of faith that there's going to be anything reasonable coming out. Mostly because they just don't understand it. I don't have a lot of faith either, because I think there'll be so many internation fights about what we should and shouldn't do. So I don't really know how to deal with that. What I am pretty sure about, though, is that no matter what good people do to try to limit or somehow control what's going on, there's going to be bad actors, and that's what scares me more. It's not so much what the tech can do, although that is scary. It's what can bad people do with it, and that, I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
I have a limited understanding of AI. I've played around with AI, but they call it a black box algorithm that not even the world's foremost experts really know how it works.
But there is that too. Right. There is that too. Um, that's why I'm hoping that everybody who's under 30 will focus on climate tech, because everybody's worried about the robots taking over, but we may not have to worry about the robots taking over if the world burns up first. So yeah.
What are your thoughts on work-life balance?
Like so many of the answers I'm giving you, my particular view, or how it affects me and how I think about it, is, I think, much different. I'm not a big believer in balance. I have a friend who's an entrepreneur as well. He goes, look, I have two speeds: fast and off. And so I don't, like, if I'm involved in the startup, like, I'm on all the time, and I love it. I like stress. I like working hard. I don't I check my email all the time. I'm pretty much available. That's not to say I don't, like, hang out and do fun things, but I don't turn things off to decompress. That's me, and I know that's not that's a not for everyone. It's probably not even healthy for me even, but I think that the notion of a 4-day work week is to me sort of, I think it's a what would be the right word? It's a construct. So I'm not sure that 4 days in a week is should necessarily be the goal. I mean, I think if you've got kind of a traditional job, maybe, but at least within the context of a startup, to me, it's more like, and I say this to my employees, I'm like, look, uh, if you need time off, take it. Like, you need a day off, you need a week off, take it. Like, it doesn't do us any good for you to be, perseverating over every decision and stressed out. And, we need you to be, sort of on the ball and crisp and focused. Just please, don't do that when we've got a major deadline or there's a fire drill that's going on or some customers, burning up the phone lines because things aren't working, like when we need you, we really need you. So that to me is like, whether it's 4-day work week or just, I wouldn't even call it unlimited vacations. It's like, take the time when you need it. We trust you to tell us when you need it, and we trust you not to abuse that trust. That's one thing. And then, when it comes to the remote stuff, which is, vaguely related to this, I'm not a big believer, and I know I'm old school on this, but I think for a startup company, I think it's pretty important for the initial, I don't know how many employees, most of them to be in the same place, most of them, most of the time, because I think, first of all, I think that's the way you build esprit de corps. I just think it's hard to build esprit de corps when people are all over the country, all over the globe, on different time zones. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's just really hard to communicate when you're starting up. Like if there are 10 or 15 people literally in a room, maybe two rooms, the information flow is much faster. You get off the phone, half the people have heard the call. Um, you're like, oh my God, I just, had this call. We need to do blah, 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 blah. And you get everybody in the same place and you have the conversation and people interact and and so much information is absorbed like through osmosis and around the figurative water cooler. Whereas if you're all remote, I get off the phone, then I got to call this person. We got to organize a Zoom call. There are different time zones. I forget some of the things that I've been told. They ask questions I didn't think about asking. I got to get back in touch. So I just think a lot of information gets lost. I think it's just not very efficient. That said, I think once a company's, kind of somewhat crystallized and there's processes for communication stuff, then I think the remote stuff works a little better. And I think, if somebody wants to work 1 day a week at home, cool. But, I don't think fully remote for me is the way to start a company.
As a serial entrepreneur, do you have a consistent team who you take with you with each of your startups?
That's really funny you asked. No, so it's interesting because I know a lot of folks, go with their, I've always started in different industries. It was video editing, it was speech recognition, it was SaaS, it was sort of computer vision stuff. And that's part of the thrill for me is just seeing something new. And I don't know, I mean, there's something challenging about uh, building a cohesive team with a bunch of people you don't know, and which I like. I mean, there's downsides to it too. So no, I mean, and there are some companies I've hired people, engineers and things from previous companies, but certainly starting out, no, the initial teams have never been the same. And I used to have a secretary, but I'm like, I don't really have a day job, so for the last couple of years, I'm doing all this advisory work, I'm teaching, I'm doing some mentoring stuff, so I don't really have a secretary right now, although. And for the last 3 or 4 months, it hasn't been much because I shut a lot down. But the scheduling gets kind of hard. So I might change that soon.
Have your lawyers and accountants been the same?
Yeah, well, my personal accountant's been with me quite a while. Lawyers, I've used the same lawyer for a couple things, but a lot of early lawyers already there. Apropos my previous answer, a lot of times the tech team has found a lawyer, and it's just a different lawyer that I might use. And I think that's just bad. You don't want to hold business from him or her. It's just bad karma. So a lot of times the lawyers will start out, and then I don't know, you know, uh, I've used, I guess, the same lawyer for a couple of different things, but I've used a lot of different lawyers, largely because of the way the company's germinated and with whom they've, it's germinated. So that's a long-winded way of saying I'm a lone wolf that tries to find some friends to work with for each new company.
What are the factors that make a startup successful?
I mean, it's probably a bunch of stuff I've already talked about, but maybe, so I'd say, obviously having a really smart team. I mean, that's like, there's nobody who wouldn't say that, right? I think, though, as I've sort of underscored a couple times in this conversation, I think smart's important. I think judgment's vital. There's a lot of people who can, say, well, here's the analysis, but then you're like, okay, which of these outcomes do you think is going to happen? I'm not even trying to say it's a different skill. I mean, that's just a different characteristic. Some people, it's just some people are savvy about these things, some people not. So I think good judgment is important because people are responsible for different parts of the business, and you need to be able to trust their judgment within their sphere. I think dedication. I think hard work. And one of my former partners said 90% of this job is showing up. You just like you gotta, because so many. If you keep pushing, like you never know which of the conversations you're going to have, which of the conferences you go to, which of these various things, just sometimes stuff that you didn't think was going to bear fruit does. And so if you don't try to do a bunch of different stuff, you just don't get what I think is the other ingredient. You just sometimes just don't get lucky. Like I think that's the ingredient that any entrepreneur whom I respect will say some material part of the success that I had at this, that, or the other endeavor is because I got lucky. And I think luck is huge, huge issue or a huge element. But you got to do enough stuff so that you can sort of like cover enough chips on the um on the roulette table. Like if you do a lot, one of those might come up. So I think those things. So I guess smarts, judgment, savvy, dedication. I'm not sure you can uh, program in luck, but I think that you get and market timing, luck and market timing, which sometimes are similar.
Based on your decades of experience, if you could go back and talk to your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give?
A lot of times people say, um, don't worry as much, right? Like don't, enjoy yourself more. With some variation of, hey, this could be fun if you just relaxed a little bit. I wouldn't give that advice to myself. I think being scared as hell was really useful. So I that's standard. Like there are a lot of tactical things and some big decisions that turned out to be wrong that I made. But and I regret. Well, I guess I'd say that just because the decision turned out to be wrong doesn't mean it wasn't the correct one at the time I made it. So, based on the information I had, based on whatever the the dreams, aspirations I was aiming for. I don't know. I don't know that I'd be able to give myself advice because I think what made me successful young was fear. What probably has helped a little bit later is experience. Yeah, I don't know that I could have not made the bad decisions that became the experience that I have. I don't know. I'm loath to give advice because everybody's so different. I mean, when it comes to this kind of stuff, without a real use or a real specific case, but I think if there's one thing I think that really made a difference is having one or two or several partners who you could really count on. So that would be, but that's general advice. I think you'd hear that from a lot of people, but I really believe in that. I think this stuff can be really lonely. One makes a boatload of mistakes the first time you're going around. If you're like me, you beat yourself up, and if you don't have some partners to share some of the burden and forgive you for messing things up, it's a real lonely journey.
Which areas of technology do you expect to offer the most opportunities for startups in the coming years?
AI is doing a lot. I mean, there's opportunity there. I just don't know. I don't know which end of that elephant you want to grab. I think, like, in the U.S., probably in Europe, I think that the climate tech stuff's really important. It's really important, but it's also, I think, a lot of it's coming into its own. There was climate tech 1.0 that was, maybe 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago. And a lot of that stuff, it was, too early, didn't quite work, classic, 1.0 stuff. Now, there's so much that's actually capable. There's the ecosystem is much bigger. The need is much more understood. What's going on with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act? So in the U.S., the money is just pouring out. So I think if I were kind of in your age and maybe out of school, maybe not. I think that's a super interesting place because I think I think a lot of people are going to succeed there, and I just think it's if we don't do that, we're all doomed. So that would be the place I'd focus.
You talk about the need for at least one business founder and a technical founder for a startup. What skills should the business founder possess, and how do you go about gaining those skills?
I will say, when my first set of partners said, "Hey, you're a lawyer, you should know how to run the business," I didn't know how to run a business, but I knew something. Like I could negotiate a contract, I could read a contract, I could. So I think the business skill set is not as specific if as the tech skill set of a deep tech company that's coming out of university. Those people need to know the tech inside and out, and they're so they're so rarefied, and what they know is so rarefied and specific that it just, you can't really replace them initially, or you can't even back them up. I mean, you need to back them up eventually, but they're irreplaceable to start with. I think it's an understanding. I'd say it's less a skill set, and it's more of a what's the right word, an understanding of being able to prioritize the precious few resources you have, and mobilize them in a way to achieve successive milestones. So I think it's a notion of how do you get from A to B rather than how do you get from A to Z, right? How do you get from A to B? Because once we get to B, we can get to C. So it's ability to really kind of prioritize and tactically deploy resources to achieve each successive milestone that the company needs to hit in order to continue to succeed. And a big piece of that is knowing what those milestones should be. So there's a lot of judgment of what does the world need to see here in order to get this thing sold, or get the next round of funding, or whatever it might be.
You teach at a graduate school of business. For someone who knows they want to become an entrepreneur, should they get a business degree, or should they just go ahead and start a startup?
I'm afraid Columbia might actually hear the answer to this, but here's what I think about a business degree in particular. I think a business degree is great for someone who was, I don't know, a fine arts major, who needs a skill set like being able to do, jockey a spreadsheet, understand marketing, who needs basically marketable skill sets in order to change careers. So I think it's a great thing. It's great skills. It's a great education in order to change careers. It's also a great education for the network, and I shouldn't say it's a great experience for the network and the credentialization if you want to go in banking and finance, or you want to go into consulting. I mean, your boss is going to have an MBA, and your boss is going to think, unless you have an MBA, you're not good enough to do this. So I think those are two really good reasons to go to business. I think if you're really sure you want to start a company, you might want to take the $150,000-$200,000 you're going to pay to a really top-notch business school and invest that in your own company, because I'm pretty sure you're going to learn a lot. And it probably for a startup, what you're going to learn is probably more applicable to the next startup you might start than anything that I could teach you.
We have come to the end of the interview, and it was filled with new, incredible insights. On behalf of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society, Bill O'Farrell, thank you so much for speaking with me again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And boy, Daniel, I should just congratulate you on all you've accomplished. And I'm sure on your website and elsewhere, all your listeners are aware. But it's really an impressive set of things you've done, and will, I'm sure, continue to do. So thanks.